For the first 3 years of the War of 1812, the United States struggled against the powerful forces of Great Britain. American attempts to invade Canada failed, and British troops and their Native American allies won several key victories. The British Navy dominated the seas, blockading American ports and damaging the US economy. In 1814, British forces even captured and burned the capital city of Washington, D.C., a major blow to American morale. However, by 1814, the situation began to change. The United States Army was now no longer the inexperienced force that had stumbled through the early campaigns. Training had improved, discipline had tightened. Officers like Winfield Scott introduced European-style drills that transformed raw recruits into capable soldiers. The strategic situation shifted dramatically in the spring of 1814. Napoleon's defeat allowed Britain to redirect experienced troops to North America. Ironically, this British reinforcement coincided with the moment the US Army was finally ready to face them. In early July 1814, this new, more prepared American force of some 3,000 men under the command of Major General Jacob Brown struck boldly into Canada. The Americans quickly captured Fort Erie, with the British quickly surrendering. The first mission for this new American army had been successful. A British force of some 3,000 men under Major General Phineas Riall moved to confront the invaders near Chippawa Creek, confident that their seasoned redcoats could scatter what they assumed were poorly trained American militia. On the 5th of July, Jacob Brown's army of some 3,500 men advanced towards the British lines. Unlike earlier battles of the war, the American line did not break. They held their formation, fired disciplined volleys, and maneuvered with precision. When British assaults failed to crack the American center, General Brown committed additional forces, and the pressure became too much. After roughly half an hour of intense fighting, Riall ordered a retreat across the creek, leaving the field and the victory to the Americans. The British suffered around 500 casualties, the Americans suffered around 350. Following the battle, the British fell back to Fort George, near the mouth of the Niagara on Lake Ontario. Once the British retreated within the fort, the Americans realized that they did not have the troops to overpower them. Furthermore, a British naval squadron controlled the lake. Commodore Isaac Chauncey, commander of the American ships based at Sackett's Harbor, New York, was waiting for new frigates and armed brigs to be completed before he challenged the British squadron. The American squadron was further delayed in port when Chauncey fell ill. As a result, No reinforcements or heavy guns were sent to Brown, and the British were able to move several units across the lake from York to reinforce Fort George. For most of July, General Jacob Brown's American army held the village of Queenston, just a few miles south of Fort George. Although this forward position gave the Americans a strong foothold in the Niagara region, it also exposed them to constant pressure. Canadian militia and First Nations warriors carried out frequent raids and skirmishes, keeping Brown's troops on edge and disrupting supply lines. By the end of July, Brown realized that his army was stretched too thin and low on supplies. To protect his men and secure much-needed provisions, he withdrew to Chippawa Creek. Brown planned to reorganize his forces there before launching a new advance west toward Burlington, which would threaten British control of the region even further. Early on the 25th of July, the British Lieutenant Governor of Upper Canada, Lieutenant General Gordon Drummond, arrived in Fort George to take personal command on the Niagara Peninsula. He immediately ordered a force under Lieutenant Colonel John Tucker to advance south from Fort Niagara along the east side of the Niagara River, hoping this would force Brown to evacuate the west bank. Instead of holding back, Brown pushed his army north. When Drummond learned that the Americans were on the move, he marched with reinforcements from Fort George to Lundy's Lane. The battlefield lay on a gently elevated ridge along what was then Lundy's Lane, surrounded by open farmland, broken only by scattered trees and wooden fences. Recognizing the strength of this ground, the British Army under Lieutenant General Gordon Drummond took full advantage of the terrain. They occupied the crest and slopes of the low hill, turning it into a formidable defensive position. At the highest point, the British massed their artillery, 2 powerful 24-pounders, 2 lighter 6-pounders, a 5.5-inch howitzer, and even a Congreve rocket detachment, giving them commanding fire and making the hill the focal point of the battle. The British Army in total consisted of around 2,800 soldiers. Late that afternoon, the American 1st Brigade of Regulars under Winfield Scott emerged from the shelter of the forest into an exposed open field. With the British artillery being in such an effective position, the British were able to successfully bombard the advancing American troops. The brigade was almost entirely destroyed, and after that initial beating, Scott ordered the advance of his main force. Scott and his men engaged the British centre, while he sent a brigade to flank around the British left that was located in a wooded area. On the British left, the Americans struck hard, driving them back in confusion, while Scott himself fixed the British centre in place. In the chaos of the fighting, the flanking force captured Major General Phineas Ryle. Lieutenant General Gordon Drummond quickly recognized the danger to his exposed flank and rushed troops from his center position to realign his troops to hold the position. The adjustment stabilized the line, but at a cost. In shifting his infantry, Drummond left his artillery insufficiently protected. Darkness was beginning to settle over the battlefield, and both sides had suffered many casualties, with the British still holding the advantageous position. Under such conditions, many commanders would have broken off the action. Instead, Jacob Brown chose to gamble everything and press the attack. Brown positioned 2 fresh brigades for an attack and ordered the commander of the 21st Infantry, Lieutenant Colonel James Miller, to capture the British artillery, to which Miller famously replied, "I'll try, sir." While British attention was drawn elsewhere along the line, Miller led his men forward in silence under the cover of darkness, closing in within mere meters of the almost entirely unprotected British artillery. At point-blank range, the 21st unleashed a crushing volley, then surged ahead with the bayonet. The effect was decisive. British gunners were cut down or driven off, the cannon were captured, and the defenders were forced from the crest of the hill. Miller's brave move earned him lasting fame as the hero of Lundy's Lane, and the British position had been overrun. As the Americans consolidated their hard-won position atop the hill and dragged their own guns forward, the British were determined to reclaim the lost artillery at any cost. The British advanced on their former position. They engaged in fierce combat with the Americans, only to be cut down and driven back amid heavy losses on both sides. Undeterred, the British launched a second attack. It too collapsed under murderous fire. Amid the confusion, Scott led an ill-coordinated charge against the British centre. The attack disintegrated almost immediately, raked by fire not only from British muskets, but, in the darkness and smoke, from American units as well. Drummond then made a final desperate attempt to break the American hold. After fierce hand-to-hand combat, the British once again were repelled. By this point, the battle had raged on for hours. Both sides were shattered beyond endurance. Casualties were severe, ammunition was nearly gone, and water was desperately scarce. Dawn finally arrived. With Scott and Brown both wounded and the army exhausted, Brown ordered a withdrawal. The retreat went unchallenged by the equally spent British. The battle ended as it had begun, tactically inconclusive and devastating. The British and Canadian forces had suffered about 867 casualties, The Americans suffered 853. Neither side won the battle directly, but Lundy's Lane nonetheless delivered a strategic victory to the British by preventing the American advance into Canada. The cost was so high that Brown abandoned the campaign entirely, withdrawing his battered army back into the United States.